10 years ago, it used to be, hey, click a link, download this virus, and then we can mess up your computers. Today, it's elaborate social engineering. Another year has passed, which means that the security vendor Sophos has released another State of Cybersecurity for the current year, 2023. I talked about this last year for 2022, and the biggest overall difference this year is that things are getting harder and more complex. You would think maybe that over time stuff would get simpler, solutions would be more robust, and just logically it might seem like it's a problem that's going to go away. But instead it's not, and we're going to talk about why that is today and what the different landscape of cybersecurity looks like. Sophos had interviewed a couple thousand companies to get a good understanding of the landscape out there and how it looks for IT and cybersecurity. And they did a good look at a varying range of size too. So everything from the SMB space all the way up to the mega corporate space. They talked with all of them to get a good understanding of what the security landscape currently looks like. 94% of all of the companies they spoke with indicated they had some type of cybersecurity attack take place over the last year, so throughout 2022. So that tells you right there that people and companies are actively getting attacked. It's just a matter of what you're doing to protect against it and what those attacks are and how you mitigate it. So even with 94% of organizations getting attacked, only 43% of small to mid-sized businesses said this is something they're worried about. Why is that? Is it because they've just simply given up? Is it simply that they don't think they're ever going to have the team or the tools to be able to fight cyber attacks? Or is it that they're just ignorant of it and they don't understand that this is something that takes place? With only 43% of SMBs being concerned, and then you go up to the other end of the spectrum, the mega corporate 5 billion plus a year companies, 67% of them are concerned. So there's a big variance between small to mid-sized business and corporate IT cybersecurity concern. And we need to talk about what the current landscape looks like before we even dive into how do you protect against it. So I want to touch on, from the Sophos report, the 4 biggest cybersecurity concerns for organizations over the last year. The first one's going to be data exfiltration. And what that simply means is data getting stolen from your company. So whatever various purposes that's going to be used for, it's just simply a matter of losing that data. And again, when I work with a lot of small to mid-sized businesses, you have some that simply just don't have confidential information. That might be manufacturing and they're simply doing a repeated process that a lot of other companies do, but they're really good at it. But their data just doesn't matter as much. Then you have other companies that are dealing with plenty of personal identifiable information, or PII, and they're actually held by compliance to protect that data. And if they have a breach, they actually have to talk about it and disclose it and sometimes pay fines and penalties. So there is a varying understanding of the importance of data and what it means if it gets leaked. But I would even look towards that SMB and dive a bit further and say, okay, well, your information about how you do the work you do isn't important, but what about your employees? If HR files were to get leaked and it had social security numbers, dates of birth, all of that kind of stuff, what do your state laws say about that? Do you have to turn over that information that it was disclosed? Do you have to tell the employees that it was disclosed? How does it look from a confidence standpoint for not only your employees, but also the other companies and vendors that you work with? The number 2 biggest concern is the good old classic phishing emails. So it's the idea that there's a scam coming over email and it's hitting your employees at your organization, and are they going to fall for it? Now, I will argue that even though this is an oldie, it's not the same as it used to be. 10 years ago, it used to be, hey, click a link, download this virus, and then we can mess up your computers. Today, it's elaborate social engineering. So the phishing email itself falls under social engineering, but the idea is you're going to go to a website, it might be a fake 365 login page, and they're going to try to get you to supply a username and password. They're going to try all these methods to get as much information as they can so that they can go in and get access to the really critical stuff. So it's no longer just mess with one computer and fry it. It's let's get into the actual organization, or get access to pretend I'm this person that I've scammed within the organization. The number 3 biggest concern is ransomware. So simply locking up data and trying to get money. And I will say one of the big takeaways from all of these attacks in the report for 2023 is that all of these attacks are scaling up based on company size. So that's not to go back and say that SMBs are, not a target and they're not getting hit. It's just that the level of attack attention is focusing on the bigger paydays. And this number 3 on the list for ransomware is really reflective of that, because most of the time, the attackers are going to look at the value of a company and what their annual revenue is. They're actually going to do that reconnaissance. This isn't simply a quick automatic process that takes place. They're going to go in and look and go, okay, you're a $5 billion company. We normally ask for 10% of your revenue. If you're a $100,000 a year company and we ask for 10% of the revenue, which one's going to get the biggest payday? And especially when it's a matter of, let's say, 5, 10%, rough number, I don't have this off the actual numbers, but let's say 5 to 10% pay it. Do you want to get that 10% off of 5 billion, or do you want to get it off of 100,000? So if you think about it logically from a people perspective and why they're doing this, that's why ransomware is still on the list and why they're attacking bigger corporations. And hand in hand with number 3 is number 4, cyber extortion. This has picked up and gotten bigger and just all over the place paired with ransomware. And the idea is that they take and encrypt the data, but first they're going to download, or from your site, upload all that information that they're going to be encrypting so that they have copies of it. And that goes back to number 1, the data exfiltration point, the idea that that data is getting out there. It's just now what they're going to do is put a ransom on it to not release that data. So there's always the encryption of data, which is the ransomware attack, and then unencrypting it to get your data back. But they usually pair it with a second attempt, which is going to be the straight up cyber extortion. So they pledge that they will delete the data if you pay the second ransom. Now, when you look at all of these ways that companies got attacked last year, you enter what is the perceived threat of how they got access and what's taking place. And we have 4 to talk about on that list too. The first big one is going to be security tool misconfiguration. All organizations say that's their biggest threat point right now within their organization, is that misconfiguration of all the security software. So we think of this a lot when we enter a new client that hasn't had a partner that's been protecting them and looking over on a proactive manner on all of their data. And you just see someone threw on a free antivirus solution, hope it's running 5, 10 years down the road, hope it's actually doing something, and then sometimes you find out that it's not, or it actually wasn't free software and you had a 30-day trial and it's expired and it's not doing anything either. Another good example of this is the firewall in an organization. Some folks let their subscriptions for those expire and then they're not doing anything, they're not getting security updates, and they're simply not working. And that's actually a very common thing. And even from the managed proactive side, our team has to stay on top of it, because as we'll talk about later, there are many, many layers of security in place to protect an organization. So it's not just, hey, watch the antivirus and everything's going to be cool. Don't worry about anything down the road. There are a lot of moving pieces, and all of those have various configurations and checkpoints that need to be looked into to make sure the whole landscape is working properly. Attackers look for misconfigurations as one of the biggest ways to get in. And the other big way that they get in is number 2, which is going to be zero-day threats. If you haven't heard this or don't know what it means, I'll touch on it real quick. A zero-day threat is when it's found that there's a flaw and a security hole in a piece of software and it hasn't been patched yet. So there's a lot of bounty programs out there which are really interesting and allow what we call the white hat hackers to find problems in software, be it your Chrome browser that you're running, be it your Mac OS on your actual computer, whatever it might be. You can go in and find those and then report them to the company so they can then take the time and verify that this is actually a problem and then release a patch to fix it. Now, what happens is sometimes the bad people, and even sometimes governments, find these security holes and they use them to their advantage. And then it gets out there that, hey, someone got breached because there's actually this security hole that's being exploited, and then the vendors have to hurry up and run and try to patch those as quick as they can, and that's when your IT team needs to patch that security hole. So when you look at your patch management policy for your organization, are you patching all critical security vulnerabilities every single day? If you're not, why not? Think about that one. The number 3 perceived cybersecurity threat is simply a shortage of people who know how to help with the cybersecurity needs of the organization. So this can be internal or external. You know, if you're a large enough company that you have an in-house cybersecurity team dedicated, and I say cybersecurity team dedicated because expecting your normal in-house IT person who's running around fixing printers to do cybersecurity and be on top of it isn't really realistic. They can't do everything at once. So it is reported that that has been a problem. There's just not enough cybersecurity knowledge that's protecting the company. And if you're working with an outside vendor, do they specialize in protecting organizations with cybersecurity? So something to vet and something to think about when you look at, is it simply just you don't have the right people in place to help you make the right decisions about security? And number 4 on that list is stolen access to data and credentials. So people actually getting into that actual data they shouldn't be seeing and they shouldn't have access to for whatever reason it might be. And similarly, credentials. So we talked about phishing on the last list. Are they getting credentials to then be able to get in and get access to things? And sometimes that's simply, old accounts that exist that shouldn't exist. And those get attacked and you figure out, oh, those shouldn't have been there in the first place. Again, it's the idea of proactively having systems in place, people in place, and good old processes that look at all these pieces to make sure that there aren't problems. So when you take those two things together and you go, okay, well, there's lots of different ways and lots of different vulnerabilities that are going to cause cybersecurity issues for an organization. If we had the right people in place and if we had the right tools in place, are we going to be effective at going through all the possible security alerts and breaches? And the reality is currently only 48% of all security alerts are being read and gone through and verified to figure out if they are actual threats. And when we talk about security alerts, that means it could be the virus software has found something funny. It could be that the firewalls detected something that was abnormal. It could be that your 365 account has started offloading a large amount of data and there's an alert generated there. But someone typically, when you look at the percentage of how accurate these attacks are, someone's going to need to look at them. And they're going to need to go in and go, no, that's normal because so-and-so does a lot of media work and they dump a large amount of data. Or it could be a matter of, oh, yes, we found out that the CFO actually forgot their email password and they locked out their account because they were the one trying to get back into it. But as you can see, if only 48% are being reviewed, that means a lot aren't. And that means there's a good chance there's a large amount of attacks that are going through that could have been prevented if someone saw those alerts and they went and did something about it. Now, the average response time, or I should say the average detection plus response time for an attack on a small and mid-sized business is 9 hours currently. And that actually surprised me. That's less than I thought it would be. 9 hours means that in the morning you could detect an alert, and by the end of the day, it's possible that you've already responded to it. When I look at a lot of the ways that organizations are getting attacked, and I've personally worked with, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's a month, and these things just sit and nobody knows about it. So when I saw 9 hours as the average response and resolution time, that was quite shocking. So I would say that's a positive from this overall cybersecurity threat landscape for this year, was that the response times are a little bit tighter than I expected them to be. Still not really great, because if you think about it, someone gets onto a server and they start running their ransomware tool, they could have that whole server encrypted in a matter of, let's say, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. So when you look at a 9-hour window, it's never going to be enough. So when you take it a step further with regards to how organizations feel about the cybersecurity landscape, only 52 of organizations feel that they're adequately equipped to deal with all of these threats that are taking place currently. Again, to the beginning points I made, is it a matter of it's just completely overwhelming? Is it any of these other reasons that they aren't able to have the right cybersecurity in place or be able to review those alerts or do anything with it? And the reality is practically half of all organizations really don't feel they're there. Going a step further, though, the desire is there for most businesses. So when you look at what folks are going to be doing for prevention in a little bit, I think it's going to ring true that the trend and the goal is going to be to put protection in place even though they don't have it currently. Now, talking about the types of attacks, one good finding this year is that active adversaries make up 23% of all the attacks that have taken place. And this is quite a bit higher. So to the point of the phishing email where it's something automatic and someone clicks a link and does something, I gave the example of the old school virus where you click a link, you try to run a file, and then it infects something automatically and destroys it or does whatever. That's greatly shifting. And 23% may or may not seem like a low number to you, but that means that of these attacks, 23% of them are human operated. So an active adversary is someone who's going in and looking for all the possible ways to exploit a vulnerability or get access into a system. So they're going to specifically target an organization. And that's the reason why the findings show that it's mostly for the larger businesses and corporations that active adversaries are engaged. But they go in, they look for one hole, they look for one vulnerability, they try to find another one. If they get shut down here, they're going to switch and try a different method. They might try getting into your firewall first because they found there was an exploit. They might find that a web server was open and they can get access to that. And then they might shift to a phishing campaign and try to get access to someone's email account or get their password for the network. And again, just like the title would suggest, they are actively going through everything they can to get into that IT infrastructure and wreak havoc. So a lot of doom and gloom there, but let's talk about what you can actually do and how you can actually work to prevent against cyber attacks and intrusion into the data of your IT infrastructure and your company. Sophos suggests that there are three big things that you need to do. The first is going to be to optimize prevention. So what systems do you need to have in place? What actually needs to be there? What's going to give you the best bang for the buck on the IT side? I talked a lot last year about what I consider the cybersecurity onion, which is all those different layers that you have to put in place. So what do you have to do there? Do you have to have a firewall plus endpoint security plus MDR, EDR, all those other fun acronyms? And on the people side, how can you train your team? How can you make sure that they have the proper resources and they go through the proper simulations and testing to verify that they're addressing the people side of things? So optimize your prevention so that all of these systems are proactively working, they're proactively in place so that you have at least a good foot to stand on to prevent something from happening. And I feel the reality is if you have the right systems in place and running, the attackers are just going to move on to those that don't. And when you think of half of organizations not feeling like they're prepared, well, why, as an attacker, would you mess with the other side? Unless it is those really, really big ticket, big money companies, why would you target the smaller ones? The second up is to reduce exposure. So not only putting all of these systems in place, but now reducing the attack surface itself and doing further proactive measures to make sure things are working properly. So a lot of organizations have a bunch of ports open on their firewalls that they don't even know about and don't even think about, and sometimes it's from old setups that they had. So have someone actually fine-tune and make sure that all access is shut off that's not mandatory. Inside your actual network, is everybody an admin throughout the network because they want to be able to do whatever they want to do? Or have you restricted that enough so that they can do their operations they need to? Maybe a couple fun things here and there, like listening to music, but not being given keys to the kingdom just because it's simple and it makes things easier. Grand scheme of things, it doesn't. So turn off any admin access that's not needed, close access to anything that's not needed, close off ports from the outside that shouldn't be used, and then further, make sure you have a patch management policy and you have procedures in place that are really going to ensure that the right things are happening at the right time. And lastly, disrupt attackers. So once an attack is happening, and once they do find a vulnerability, and they might get past the first gate, so to speak, into your network, what's going to stop them from going further? There's lots of great technology and tools out there that we use and organizations are using to effectively do that. Because the reality is, it's not a virus file, it's an active adversary that's poking around and looking for something. And there are great tools available that can look for behavioral things that are taking place that a person would be doing. Because if they're in your system, they're now going to be actively using completely legitimate and valid methods to get access to your systems. They're going to use a real password because they figured out how to crack it, or someone gave up that password information. And so the tools that you can use can block down that access. And when you look at the Sophos security landscape, the reason a lot of folks use the firewalls, the switches, the endpoint software, the MDR team is because all of that ties together and it provides this uniform security blanket that can talk to each other. So if someone got through the edge of the firewall, it picks that up somewhere down the road, be it on an endpoint, or it finds out someone's on a server that shouldn't be on a server and they're doing something bad. It can send a signal out to every other device to block access from that person, and from the firewall side, cut off ties to where they're connecting from the outside. So there's lots of interesting ways that you can really disrupt the attackers based on technology, learning, reviewing those alerts, and seeing behaviors that are taking place. And that's why that's one number 3, to make sure that you actually disrupt and stop the attacks that might be taking place. So when all the organizations polled were asked what they were going to be putting in place next year, or I guess over this year, 2023, to help prevent attacks, 78% of them said they were going to be deploying what's called EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response. This isn't simply antivirus software. This is software that's looking for behavioral information. It's analyzing a lot of data that's coming in and out of the computer, and it's reporting back and scoring it and generating alerts based on what is taking place on the entire endpoint from a network security standpoint. And it's going to report that back, and then someone has to review it. So endpoint detection and response is simply a mechanism that can gather data, send it off somewhere else, and allow a team to review it. Now, 44% of organizations said they're going to take it a step further and move to what's called MDR, Managed Detection and Response. So it takes those same EDR components, but now it adds a human element to it. And that means there's going to be a team at a Security Operations Center, or SOC, that's going to be reviewing all of those alerts and directly engaging on that endpoint to protect from attackers. So an example of this might be a server has someone break into it. And they go in there and they start offloading a huge amount of data, or they start running a ransomware encryptor. Now, the software, the endpoint software on that server, is going to send an alert to the SOC team, and it's going to say there's a critical issue taking place. Again, it's not a virus necessarily, but it's going to have something taking place that's a huge flag, red flag, that's flown up the pole, and someone on that security team is going to go, oh, okay, good, this is taking place. I'm going to immediately terminate network access on that server because of the way the software works, and shut off access for that server to every other device on the network. Because you don't want any of that spreading, and you need a team to be able to go in there and engage with it and see what's going on and really mitigate that threat. So if I had to pick one thing that's going to be big in the next year to two on the cybersecurity protection front, it's absolutely going to be MDR, Managed Detection and Response. When we talked about all of the companies that don't feel they have the right teams in place to protect against this, when we talk about all of the business owners who are saying that they just simply don't have the resources, or the attacks are just too elaborate and they don't know how to do it, the reality is you're going to need a team that can do that, and they can review 100% of alerts instead of 40-some% of alerts. And as the complexity picks up on how these attacks are taking place, and knowing that it's active adversaries utilizing plenty of different methods to carry out an attack, you know, it is going to take that further development and step. And that's why we at our company work as a partner to organizations to take care of IT infrastructure as well as cybersecurity. Because the reality is, it's simply more affordable to engage an outside team to do this for you, but you're also getting a larger return on investment. You're going to be able to see all of these events being handled in a timely manner with reporting to back it up, and it's at a small fraction of having an in-house person to do it. It's a complex beast. It takes a whole team to carry it out, and that's why I think managed detection and response, especially from partners like Sophos, are going to be a big deal. So that's it this time. I'll see you sometime in 2024 to go over the next annual report, and we'll see how much has changed. Take care.